And we're live. Welcome to Breaking Barriers with me, Sinead Sharkey-Steenson. Yes, all the S's from Generation Women. I am, for those of you that don't know me, career and leadership coach. I specialise in helping women get into senior leadership positions, and particularly when navigating menopause, perimenopause, that time of life. And actually, when I was preparing for this, Lee, I was thinking it's exactly a year since I did my TEDx talk, which put me on this path of opening up about my own menopause and perimenopause journey, which has been a bumpy ride. And so anybody that's watched these episodes will know that. So we will be getting into all of that. Welcome, Lee. I'll do a proper intro for you in a minute, but how are you doing?
Really well, thank you, Sinead. Really well, and great to be able to join you today.
Oh, I'm delighted you're here. Lee's bio is one of those that makes you wonder what you've been doing with your life because there's so much in it. So I'll give you some of the highlights. Lee actually came to my attention through his prolific LinkedIn posting and sharing, and I've been following him for a couple of years and really enjoying his posts. And he's the founder and CEO of Male Allies UK. And obviously, one of the things I often get asked is how do we engage men in this conversation? So that's what we're going to be all about today. He's had a very diverse career, from corporate finance to building and exiting a tech company. And now he's all about engaging men in inclusion and promoting effective allyship. I'll just name a few of the trillion accolades that we could, culminating in the most important one. So, been featured on the Startups 100 Index, received a Great British Entrepreneur Award, sits on the board of CMI Women, Regenerate UK, and Manchester Metropolitan University Business School. And in 2024, he received the Freedom of the City of London. Whoa, for a northern lad, that's pretty epic. For services to equality in business. He's a Kavli Fellow. Have I said that correctly? I should have checked that with you before. Of the National Academy of Sciences in the USA, being the first Black British scientist to be awarded in its 33-year history, which is amazing, for his work on health inequalities, which is a great passion of mine as well. Got the 2023 UN Women Changemaker of the Year, Ambassador for the UK Government's Lilac Review for Disabled Entrepreneurship. And that's one of the reasons I really enjoy your stuff, because you look at it from lots of different angles. So you're about allyship and intersectionality. And I will finish with, you've just launched your first, is it your first book, Lee? Am I right about that?
Yep, first solo authored book.
Yeah. Momentum, reboot your career, unlock your potential. So, wow. And there's so many more things I could have told you there. We'll drop them all into the comments. But welcome, Lee. So, I think the best place to start is really with your story. Everybody has a good story, and I know yours is pretty cracking. So,
Yeah.
Tell us, how did you get to this point in life?
Yeah, so I mean, like everyone, it's been a bit of a journey. So I started life born 40 years ago on a council estate in the northwest. Had a few adults who really believed in me, and that helped me become the first one in my extended family to university, where I got there and then dropped out and then went back again and then managed to graduate. And from there, as Sinead said, I've had an interesting career in different industries. But probably the most important part is that after falling out of my career in the 2008 recession, decided to set up a tech business from my parents' back bedroom. Young, naive, I suppose in many ways, not realising what would that become when all of a sudden you're leading a team and having a lot of responsibility. But 5 years into that journey, I became unwell, lost the ability to walk, and had to relearn to walk again, which was a year years recovery, which was very challenging in its own way, but also very formative in the work that I do today. And it was after that period that I actually decided to think about what I was going to do next. And instead of going back into my business, uh, the recovery period, my daughter had been born when I was in walk-in rehab. So for me, I had a mission to get back on my feet so I could play with my children, and that really kind of drove me to get through the setbacks, the pain, and the challenges of recovery. So I had a bit more perspective on life, and decided not to go back into my business, but to become a stay-at-home father to my two children. And while that was initially like something I was planning to do for a few months, that few months became 3 years, and actually through looking after my two little ones, I learned an awful lot about myself on that journey. I went to baby and toddler groups and found myself to be the only father there, which was definitely an experience that made me uncomfortable and made me realise some things I'd not really considered in my life to that point. And also just being able to sit down and listen to the stories of lots of women in those spaces just widened my own perspective and made me think about some of the things that I wasn't noticing, but actually start to think, maybe what could I do to make a difference? What could I do to make people's experience on this planet better? What could I do to close some of the gaps that exist in society? And I was doing my masters at that time as well, which funnily enough was in a very similar area. So it felt like everything suddenly started to come together. And fundamentally, I decided when both my children had started school that actually I wanted to do something different than the typical business building that I've done before, and really start to think about how can I make the world a better place through the things that I build and the work that I do. So the past 5 years has been exploring areas around well-being and inclusion, really looking at the, I suppose, human sustainability and people skill aspects of the world that we live in today. And a lot of that has had me starting to think about what are the conversations that we don't have, that we need to have, what are the topics that are stigmatized and taboo, but actually the world would be better if people had more knowledge and understanding about them. And how do we bring people together who might not see things the same way, might feel quite differently about things, maybe have different beliefs or different backgrounds? How do we bring those people together so they can get curious, actually connect to each other, and do what fundamentally we love to do as humans, which is feel like we belong to something, feel like we're
Yeah.
doing something together, and actually have a level of unity and solidarity. Because times are challenging at the minute, and I think that more than ever, our work to understand what life's like for boys in school, in society today, and to consider what skills the men need for the future, and how do we close those gender gaps, those health gaps, those gaps in society, in sport, in institutions. Because if we can close those gaps and work together to do that, we can fundamentally make the world a better place.
Brilliant. And so it makes me really think about, and I know both of us are very interested in career journeys and how you unlock that potential, but what a different set of skills are required to do what you do now to maybe what you were doing before. So what was that like, making that transition and that learning curve that you were on?
Yeah, so I think in some ways, some of the skills that I picked up from building a business in the tech space, from building teams, from working with lots of different people, and then the experience of caregiving for my children, where again I was in different environments, but I was learning how to, I suppose, if I think about my negotiation skills, having two little toddlers makes you incredibly good at negotiating. It does make you a lot more patient and a lot more present, more kind of succinct in your own communication. And I suppose what we don't consider is that for everything that we do in life, whether that be caregiving, our career, our hobbies, we build skills from them. And actually, those skills can be, utilized in so many different ways. It's sometimes when we stop and reflect on all the skills that we've built and how we can apply them. But at the same time, career pivots aren't easy. All of a sudden, the network that I used to have didn't really have the same advice or considerations that I was having at that time. I went from a business that worked on products to a business that worked in services, and that meant that for me, I had to almost treat it like I was a beginner, because one of the biggest challenges that we see is people trying to replicate what they previously did because it worked then, but the world's changed and things, don't always go how you expect a second time. So for me, it was actually applying and thinking, I'm at the start of this journey. I am a beginner. I'm going to be curious and test things I'm not going to try and take anything for granted. And more than ever, I think that curiosity was driven by my experiences, not in the workplace, but outside of the workplace. I'm just starting to think what difference I could make. And yeah, the stories I heard in those baby and toddler groups fundamentally changed how I navigated the world and how I saw the world. And that meant that I started to see lots of other things that I didn't notice before and started to get more curious and more questioning about why things were the way that they were and did they have to be that way. But I think for anyone who's thinking about potentially pivoting your career, just take a moment to reflect on all the skills that you've built on the journey so far. And just remember, especially for people skills, they transfer across so many different things. And you've probably built leadership skills, even if you've not been a leader by title, by simply leading some of the things that you have in your everyday life and actually wake up in the morning and leading yourself as well.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I'm sure we're all feeling that in January, particularly. A lot more of leading of ourselves is required. And and so thinking back to that time, where you obviously had a complete change in perspective and mission, how did you reformulate that and get clear, actually, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, so if I'm honest, Sinead, that took years. It took years of reflection, kind of. It actually took a lot of work on myself to get to that point. I had to spend some time kind of unlearning things that I'd learnt that weren't particularly helpful. I had to spend a lot of time listening to other people that helped widen my perspective and give me more kind of understanding and knowledge to play around with in my own head to explore. And I had to then kind of learn some new things, things that I hadn't noticed or considered before. And actually, if I think about a lot of the stuff that I've written in my recent book, which we might talk about later, a lot of those are the 13 lessons I've had to learn, and that actually I've learned the hard way most of the time. So I think actually it was quite often in the discomfort or the adversity that I've been through that I've been able to learn. But I definitely didn't wake up one morning and think, okay, that's it, I'm on a social mission. It took really understanding that lots of threads of purpose that have popped into my life, realizing the things that I find value in doing, the things that I enjoy doing, the things that I can do effectively, but also thinking about the things that kind of align with my energy and my values. And even that takes exploration. I think sometimes people talk about, well, I can help you find your purpose, but I feel that finding your purpose takes a lot of chiseling, gradually chiseling away to start to understand who you are underneath all the stuff that society puts and sticks on you as who you should be. So it was a real kind of formative journey to understand who I was away from everything else. And that again took time away from the busyness of everyday life. So I'd say for the work that I do today, it's been in many ways 10 years in the making. And some people will be like, well, wow, that's a long time to pivot a career. But actually, you learn so much from the journey and the steps and the progress that you make. That's what helps shape and refine you. And you have to go out and live and experiment to start to understand what difference you can make. So while at the same time, I think people can be like, wow, 10 years for change? It doesn't need to be 10 years. But I spent a lot of time reflecting on the difference that I could make. And I wanted to do something for the longer term, for our generation. There's a good chance we might live to 100 if we look after ourselves. So there's a lot more life stages ahead as I kind of turn 40 and think, what can I do impactfully, for the next 40, 50 years to leave the earth, to leave, my own children and grandchildren a better world than I came into. And yeah, I wake up every day knowing that I'm making a difference, and that gets me out of bed in the morning because I do love what I do. I do love the impact that I can make, and I love going to work. I also love going home, and I think that's a measure of success for anyone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um and I love that description of the journey, and I think, because I think a lot of people from the outside look at it like, oh, suddenly, wow, Lee's made a real impact here. He seems to have come from nowhere, which is nonsense. And what I'm hearing is something I would often say to clients when they're thinking about making a change, is nothing is wasted. You're learning, you're growing skills, you're building the whole way. And actually nobody shifts gears and like goes from this to this overnight. There is a lot of soul searching and a lot of growing and developing, and it's more of an evolutionary arc here there that's come. So that's amazing. And thinking about that journey and then that evolution, like what are some of the things that you've uncovered that have become cornerstones now of what you do? Maybe things you've heard or seen, or conversations you've had. What are those standout things for you? Like,
Yeah, so it's definitely kind of, and that's evolved over time as well. So naturally, when I became a stay-at-home father, I saw two really clear things. Firstly, that caregiving isn't valued in the UK, and sadly, that's just a reality. And it was interesting being a father because you got different perspectives. Some people saw you as, you know, almost some kind of superhero because there's so few fathers taking or able to take the active role. But I was in a really privileged place because I had the business. I could financially take that opportunity. But on the other side, seeing how sometimes people were treated for deciding to be a primary caregiver and not going out there and taking the work approach to life. And I was definitely at that point passionate about making a difference for all parents and to get caregiving higher up on the priorities and being valued for the difference it makes. Because if we don't have caregiving, we don't have a future workforce. It's just that investment in the future, but not just caregiving for our children, but also caregiving for elders in society, given that they've invested so much in society as well. For me, it's just something I became passionate about. I think the other side as well to that is spending time with lots of mothers and grandmothers. I just heard that pretty much all of them have faced some kind of discrimination or harassment or abuse. And I was just like, that's a societal problem. It's not just a few individuals, it's everyone. And I started to think, well, surely there's something we can do to start to change some of the systems, to start to understand what the root causes of that are and make a difference, because these people I've got to know, they didn't deserve that. In fact, some of the stuff they told me is pretty harrowing, and it's just not fair. And from like a moral standpoint, I was pretty offended that this just seemed to be accepted as just what it was. So that kind of journey started, and at the same time I was at university looking at health inequality, and I was just looking at the gaps in funding for women's health, looking at the absolutely almost zero conversation around menstruation and menopause, and I just started to think, why is this? It impacts 52% of the UK population directly, and yet there's barely any research. Things are not happening, conversations are not happening. So I got to be a bit of a bee in my bonnet about that. And that's something that kind of then came through into my work when I was like, okay, let's build wellbeing strategies that actually look across different gender challenges. Let's open up some of those conversations and close some of those gender gaps. And that was something I really kind of focused on for a few years, which is interestingly now come full circle to the work we do at Male Allies UK, which is very much focused on, like, historically men have not engaged in these conversations. And that's not just about gender health. It's also about conversations about men's health as well.
I was going to say health in general, maybe even.
Yeah. And also, like, my interest in engaging men in the kind of personal development for the future, things such as inclusion and allyship and skills of connecting with other people. Because what I've started to see fundamentally through my work with men and boys is that we have a real challenge at the minute with that human connection. We live in a very individualistic world that doesn't prioritize human connection, but men struggle quite often with exploring inside themselves. So we need each other. We need a level of brotherhood to go and explore the world and not be scared and not fear and keep us in a place where we feel trapped. So I'm very passionate about helping men to expand into space and move beyond the gender norms that keep us stuck. Because when we're stuck in those norms, we're not able to live full life as men. And if we can actually step outside of those boundaries and barriers, it allows us to actually make a difference in the world and partner with other people. And then we can actually accelerate change that benefits everyone. Because obviously, for most men at the minute, we're struggling.
Yeah.
Like, societal statistics and indicators for men are not going in a good direction, whether it's educational attainment, addiction and suicide, life satisfaction and mental health. So we definitely need that, togetherness. We need to find ways to truly connect. We need to become that bit deeper with each other. And that does require moving beyond the stereotypes that exist and actually creating spaces where we can do that. And that's where I see allyship playing such a vital role, because allyship is how do we actually come together? And the whole meaning of the word allyship comes from the old French word allier, which means to unite, to combine, and to come together. And really, we just need more of that, because in a world that is feeling quite lonely and isolated, and in a world where people lack purpose and meaning, if we can actually go on a journey to find some meaning and purpose in our lives and find some connection, actually, as humans, we can do amazing things. So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what fuels me.
Oh, well, that's really powerful and inspiring, and I'm sure resonates with many people that listen or watch. And and so there's so many things I want to dig into there. It's funny, when Lee and I were preparing for this, I said I'm not big on small talk. I'm only big on big talk. And Lee was like, "We will be going deep." so so one of the things, obviously, I mean, this series is very much focused on menopause, so there'll be other things that we come back to, but I really would love to explore with you about how we open up that conversation with men. It's only started to open up really with women, which is one of the interesting things. And you talk in there about gendered health challenges. I think when I started this work, one of the things I learned was that endometriosis is as common as asthma. Every GP clinic in the country has an asthma clinic. Where are the endometriosis clinics? And this is how hidden women's health is. And menopause, I get some people saying, oh, that's all anybody seems to talk about anymore. But nobody spoke about it until a couple of years ago. Perimenopause was a word most of the women I know had never heard of, including myself. So when I started going through it, I didn't know what I was experiencing. I didn't know what was happening. And so then to bring men into this conversation that women aren't that sure of, where do we start, and what's your experience of that, Lee?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Sinead, because obviously, historically, as a topic, it's been made to be taboo. The way
Mm-hmm.
it's been framed for many of the older generation, you know, what was known as the change. It didn't even, he couldn't even use the language and the terminology. No one wanted to speak about it. And I understand that at a point in time, from a life expectancy perspective, it was actually quite close towards the end of a woman's life, 300 years ago, with the life expectancy being what it was. So in those times, it was framed as a kind of a state that you got to towards the end of your life. Obviously now, with lots of women living to 100, it generally is happening halfway through life,
Yeah.
and it's removing those perspectives that it's an end of life thing that people still reference. That kind of gendered ageism that's really kind of insidious in so much of our society. But in terms of the conversation with men, I think the starting point is to consider that 51% of the planet are female, 52% of the UK population are female, and they are guaranteed to go through it, whether it happens naturally, whether it happens due to clinical intervention, or whether it happens due to medication. And there are very few things that you can guarantee for 52% of a whole population. Birth, yeah, death, yeah, taxes, definitely, but not much else. And what does that mean when more than half of the population will directly go through it? It means that every single individual is indirectly impacted by it, whether they know it or whether they don't. And just to have that little bit of knowledge, because again, as something becomes and increases in awareness, people feel like they need a bit more space to start to talk about it, to start to explore it. And what I'm really passionate about is obviously for so many couples, they are together at this point. And it's an incredibly challenging period for women when one hormone literally says, bye, I'm off. That's it. I'm packing up and I'm moving out. Um, and to even be able to express what that feels like and find the words is incredibly difficult. Uh, like trying to explain our emotions in words to people is really quite hard. And from what we know, 25% of the population have mild symptoms, 50% have moderate, and 25% have really severe symptoms. So it's for pretty much everyone, it's going to have an impact on their day to day. Obviously, for partners, it can mean that your partner changes in front of you, and not even considering it means that you have no place to understand or appreciate where that change might come from. And I've spoken to a lot of men who suddenly their partner entered perimenopause and they started to struggle. The 60 odd different symptoms, the different patterns, it's different in every single person who goes through it. But those patterns came to the fore, and the men suddenly thought, she's lost her libido. That must be something to do with me. Am I unattractive? Am I undesirable? What have I done? Am I getting old? Do I need to leave and go and do something else? And they take it quite personally and don't really know how to express that, and that then comes out in resentment or suppression, when actually in some ways that's the point to actually think, okay, like, what's going on? Is there something that you might need? Is there anything we can change? Maybe it won't be like it was, but how can we define something new for the future? And it's similar with things such as emotional balance, for example. And you've got partners saying all of a sudden, like, I can't say anything. Like, she's just like, I don't even know. I don't want to be in the same room as her. And it's like, have we not got curious as to why that might be, and actually how we can be considerate in that space? And that's not saying that men have to take the whole of the responsibility for this, but instead of going into ourselves and blaming ourselves, because that quite often puts relationships on the rocks. When actually, when I've spoken to people who've gone through this together as a couple, and they've moved from that taking it personally to thinking about how they can support each other, the woman's quite often said things were rocky, but he actually became my rock. And it actually can make relationships stronger on the other side through the change that you make together, through actually reconnecting through some of the adversity and challenge, and actually just an acceptance that 52% of the population is going to go through this. So it's not something that is like a niche health condition that people might have. It's a guarantee, and therefore it's almost like, think about the things that we learn at school. How many times are you going to apply trigonometry or quadratic equations? Nowhere near as often as you're going to be navigating and connecting with people who are going through perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. So it has a usefulness in being able to navigate the world around us. And actually, what's interesting is when men get curious about things such as menopause and menstruation, they don't need to suddenly become an expert, but they've got a little bit of knowledge that then helps them navigate if the daughter's having a period. And instead of repelling in horror, they actually become just a bit more normal and a bit more supportive. But it also makes men get curious about their own health. And that's a really interesting thing that we've found, is when men start to get curious about things they don't go through themselves, they also start to get curious about things they might go through themselves and become a bit more likely to check themselves if something's been hitting, to go and get some support, and if they're struggling mentally, to actually find someone to open up to and someone to listen. So yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot to be said.
I love that. And it is about those conversations, because while we're all off dealing with our own stuff, we're missing all the connection, all the support, and all the change that can come from that. So, if you're listening to me and understand it, and even just being curious what's going on, I have noticed that you maybe not feeling yourself, or you seem a bit down, or whatever it may be, uh, just opening up that conversation. And the same thing can happen the other way around, because yeah, men are going through their own challenges, and so just that little bit more openness, support, consideration, curiosity changes the conversation, and it absolutely does bring you together. I know in my personal experience, so I'm one of those people that when I go through things, I feel it's my ultimate duty to educate everybody around me what's going on. But like my husband really stepped up and listened and learned a lot. My brothers did, and then equally, yeah, it has opened up much more important conversations between all of us about what's going on with each of us and how we can help. So, when you talk to men about this stuff, do you get any interesting reactions? Or, like, what are their fears about any of this? Or, how does that show up?
Yeah, so naturally, when it's something that historically hasn't been talked about by anyone, never mind men, it does create an element of curiosity about, why would we? Why should we? What you know, what's the end game behind this? Because we are very outcome obsessed as a group of people now. We're always looking to see, well, why would we do it, and what's in it for me, and what difference will it make? And sometimes exploring a little bit around that, because what's really interesting is, again, when you open up conversations and people get a fundamental, grasp of the basic knowledge, actually it reduces fear of having these conversations, of being in these situations, because in our research around what stops men having conversations around inclusion and diversity and around things that historically men don't talk about, the biggest factor is fear. There's fear around not wanting to overstep the mark and get it wrong, fear of upsetting people, fear of being judged by other men. So suddenly, why would you be talking about that? That's strange. If you suddenly become politically correct or a bit woke or a bit sensitive in your old age.
Snowflake.
And it's like, yeah, and it's like also kind of fear of getting challenged when you don't have a lot of knowledge about something. It's quite hard because then, if someone's going to question you, you don't have, all the expertise to fall back on to explain to people. So that can sometimes mean that conversations don't happen. But actually, what's really interesting is if you think about anything that we've discovered as a species, it started with getting curious about what it was and starting to have conversations and hearing people's different perspectives and then starting to test them against reality. So actually, it's interesting because some men will sit there in these kind of sessions with their arms crossed, like, oh my God, like, what is this? Why am I here? Should I even come? Or I've been sent, I didn't want to come. And that kind of feeling of, passivity and almost a bit of resistance. But it's really interesting to see how that changes when you give them a bit of space to explore. There's a lot of people who feel they've not been listened to in society, and that means that they then are not willing to listen back. And if we create spaces where people can be listened to, and where some of that curiosity starts to spark, and the courage to say some of the things that actually have been going on for them, that they don't want to vulnerably open up, but they will do if the space is created. And I definitely think around this particular topic, it kind of sits in the realm of everyone is navigating around the world with people who are going through perimenopause and menopause in the workplace, friends, family, and just in their ecosystem of the things they're connected into, whether it be hobbies and interests or particular groups. There's incredible power in just having that wider perspective. And again, men are not going to go through it unless it's something we end up going through from a medical perspective. And even then, it's highly unlikely to be the same. But we can have some appreciation for a few of the symptoms that can be caused by things that do impact us. And it's just at the end of the day, just because we don't go through it doesn't mean we shouldn't care and shouldn't actually think about how we can make a difference. And I
Yeah.
think that's really powerful. So for me, in those conversations with men, they come into those rooms with all sorts of different viewpoints. But the thing that I really remember is we did a piece of work 2 years ago with some leaders in the advertising and communications industry. And the most senior man in the room before the end of the session, he said to the rest of the group, he said, you know what, everyone, I'm in my 50s, most of you are in your 40s. There's one thing I suggest you all go and do after this session and take seriously over the next year. Go and upskill yourself on the menopause. You know why? Because I wish I had. It would have saved me 3 years of heartache in my marriage. And actually, I don't want you to go through what I've been through. And I'm so passionate about it now that I talk about it on the golf course. I talk about it in the pub. Like, I'll tell anyone who's willing to listen that just go and get yourself some knowledge and explore it a bit, because it will be a lifesaver for your own marriage. And that just reinforced why we do the work that we do. And again, nowadays the topics expand way beyond just menopause. But actually, if we can start talking about things, suddenly they're just less scary and they actually become normal, like they are. It's a life stage. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Fear a life stage.
I love that, and I love what you said. And it is that. I mean, it's your friends, it's your mum, it's your sister, your cousin, whoever. And obviously, uh, it's something that you may not go through, but it impacts absolutely everybody. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about, we're both very purpose-driven people, Lee. I think that's obvious. And one of the things that really frustrates me and gets my blood boiling, so I take action, is women leaving their jobs. And particularly with so many women have worked blooming hard to get to senior roles, and then just at when they're riding high in their careers, perimenopause kicks in, and that can be the breaking point to make them consider stepping down, stepping back, or leaving. And so, what is it that we can do in terms of how we approach this with workplaces, with conversations that we're having, awareness we're building? What are some of your thoughts on the steps we need to take?
Yeah, that's a massive conversation, Sinead. So for me, like, I've spoken to businesses, I've got quite strong opinions that it simply doesn't make sense not to have the support mechanisms there in place, because incredibly talented, skilled, and resilient women, companies are losing them due to a basic lack of support, and it's a cost a fortune to replace those skill sets. Because that experience, the skill sets that women build, navigating, the barriers and obstacles that exist in the world and in business, means that they have really wide and broad and effective skill sets. And for companies to lose those, it doesn't make sense to me. And I think, in a survey a few years back, they said that 1 in 10 women was thinking about leaving the workplace because they hadn't had any consideration for the challenges they were going through. And that's hundreds of thousands of women thinking, actually, is this the right place? And they will take their skills elsewhere. And that doesn't make any business sense at all. But in a more kind of moral and human sense, it's really important that we actually consider again the changing in life stages. Like, women are going to be working longer than they ever have before. Yeah, gender pension gaps and other aspects mean that that's going to be a reality. But we are all living longer, and that does mean that the world does need to change too. And when it comes to it, that little bit of support is really, really powerful. And it's not just perimenopause or menopause, it's neurodiversity, it's other disabilities or differences that mean that a little adjustment or something being a little bit different makes someone more effective at their job. Why wouldn't you do that? And most of these things are low cost or no cost to actually make those little changes that then facilitate someone to continue to work at their best. And having spoken to a lot of women over the years, they say, but we don't want big sweeping change, we don't want big banners, we don't want big events saying that, we're menopausal, come and help us. They just want a
We don't
little,
want cupcakes.
no, they just want a little bit of flexibility when things are challenging, a little bit of consideration, because some days it can be really bloody tough, a little bit of compassion, because the world can be quite cruel sometimes, and fundamentally, just a little. They're looking for just little changes and to be treated like a human. And that's what it fundamentally comes down to. So when I'm talking about having these conversations, it's all about focusing on the person, not the problem. because it can be so easy in business for people to like, oh well, she's only working 80% of what she did 3 years ago, and looking at it as a problem and trying to, take her on a disciplinary because she's not performing like she used to. Why don't you actually start with, okay, so you're not where you were previously at. Is there anything we can actually do to support you? Really looking at the person, not the problem. Actually thinking about needs. Like, what do people need? Start from that place of curiosity, and actually think that these symptoms can be so debilitating for some people that the fact they're still at work making stuff happen is, it's a miracle in some cases that they're still there. But you speak to women, and no one wants to be performing lower than the level that they were in a place where they've got a better skill set, more experience, and should technically be more effective. But these symptoms can make it really hard. Like, you think things such as like brain fog, or they play a role. It makes it difficult. Not sleeping, like having challenges with sleeping, impacts your performance, even though you don't want it to. It does. So it's really focused on having people think about entering those conversations from a place of curiosity, from a place of thinking about what an individual might need. They might not have to share that they're actually going through it, but they might be able to say, I'm having some challenges with this. What can we do to make it a little bit easier? And actually, so often, it's a place where a little change here or there that's already sometimes happened between employees, and a trusted person to maybe talk to a little bit can just make such a difference, because the medical system doesn't always give you validation. Quite often it really doesn't. And in a society where sometimes there's a lack of understanding, how a workplace treats someone can actually fundamentally change their life. So yeah, it's so important that we have those conversations from a place of not, not don't share that, or we don't talk about it here, or it's a problem, but actually focusing on the person, the needs, the bit of support that we can give, and the difference that we can make.
Yeah, I love that. How can we help? And remembering that, how often have they overperformed? And like, my experience is quite often these are women that are dramatically overperforming on the regular, and then suddenly find that they can't. And so we're all allowed to pull back at some stages, and it can be for all different reasons, and this is one of them. Thank you so much for sharing all of those thoughts and ideas on that. Before we wrap up, I would love to hear a bit more about you, Lee, what you're working on now, what's coming up for you, what can we look forward to in Lee Chambers' world of world global change.
Well, everything takes time, Sinead. So yeah, for me, it's continuing to grow Male Allies UK, where we can actively work to close gender gaps, to really equip people with the skills of allyship so they can start coming together, co-creating and co-designing the change, having those conversations that we need to have instead of those silences that, again, were discontentment brews, and continuing to focus on our work with boys in schools, collaborating with organisations that work with girls in schools so we can bring boys and girls together to create change. But also kind of supporting boys in starting to think about who they can become in the future, instead of being told who they are from influences online, which are not particularly helpful to helping them discover themselves. I think that there's elements of that in the business world and elements of that in the political world as well. I'd love to see some policy change around things such as parental leave, and outcomes and community cohesion. But I suppose this year as well, my book has just released last week, Momentum, 13 Ways to Unlock Your Potential. And like I said earlier, it is 13 lessons that if you'd have told me them at the start of my career 20 years ago, I'd have been like, oh, they're not important. But on reflection, 20 years later, I wish I'd have known them back then and listened and really, considered them to be actually quite pivotal as I've changed career and taken different roles and worked in different places. And yeah, it's true. Most of those lessons I had to learn the hard way. But if you, take the time to read the book, hopefully a few of those lessons will resonate with you. And you might not need to go through the adversity and the trauma that I've had to go through to learn them. maybe you'll be able to take those examples and those exercises and go and apply them yourselves. So I'm looking forward to the kind of the book tour around that, going around some UK cities and bringing it to life for organisations. But yeah, we continue to ensure that we are gonna create allyship, create that togetherness. We do live in a world where there's a lot of fear, a lot of distrust, and a lot of division. And my focus is to bring a world where we do have more trust, more togetherness, and we're able to actually unify on changing the world together. So yeah, it's all a part of a mission, Sinead, but it's good to be part of that mission with people like yourself. So yeah, onwards we continue.
Brilliant. That sounds exciting, and hopefully we will be welcoming you to Belfast in May as well. So watch this space for more news on that. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Lee. Really appreciate it. I know this is a video that will be watched again and again and again on LinkedIn and on YouTube. If people want to reach out to you, want to connect with you, want to find out more, what's the best way for them to do that?
So the best way to connect with me would be either on LinkedIn. So I'm Lee Chambers, and I'll probably be the first one that pops up on your list. Or if you want to know a bit more about the wider perspective, I do have a website which is leechambers.org, and on there you'll find more information about myself, my book, and my business. And yeah, feel free to email if you want to know any more, and always happy to have a conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee.